All right, so first article up today is from HousingWire. It's DataDigest, will work for housing. They released this study the first week of January talking about teacher salaries, and the study comes from Colorado, but there's a trend I want to talk about in this. So let's go over some of what the report said, and then the trend I want everyone to be listening to and listening for is this ain't just teachers. It's one profession that's highlighted in this study, but it is kind of like a reflection and a microcosm of a lot of other industries and jobs that are in that same kind of pay grade that are necessary in a city or a township, that we have to have people who do these sets of things at these incomes, and they cannot afford housing.
Yeah.
So first of all, let's get into the report a little bit. So it says a Colorado teacher making the average salary had $20,000 to put down towards a down payment, and were willing to spend 30% of their pre-tax salary on a mortgage payment, and they could afford a house that cost $225,000 based on their income, which is like around $63,000 in this example. Again, this is an example.
Translate like $52.50 a month.
Here's the problem. This says the typical home is $528,000. So you have an affordability of $225,000, and you have a home price average of $528,000. Now, if you have a second income and you and your spouse make the same amount of money, cool. Maybe you can be touching that $528,000. But let's say you are not. Let's say you're unmarried, you're on your own, and you're a teacher. You aren't buying a house in Colorado. So the report says we have this issue about this one place, and this school district actually went and became basically home builder landlord, and was acquiring properties to convert, bring them back up, and to kind of renovate them, I should say, and so that the teachers would have housing to kind of offset the amount of their salary and what they could afford.
Yeah, I was reading through that, and I thought that was very interesting. And it's like you're essentially going to be, living under your employer's property.
It's like government housing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought about it. I'm like, and I mean, in some cases, I think it does make a lot of sense because of markets like these that people unfortunately can't afford the price range. But I mean, you take that over here to San Diego. I mean, it's not that far off. I mean, the range of the price, the price points are similarly the same, and the incomes are what aren't there to be able to support the price points.
Yeah, proportionately they're relative to San Diego and other top 100 metros. I mean, you forget San Diego and this area in Colorado. Okay, let's talk about Miami. How about LA? What about Dallas?
They all have those exact same jobs,
Chicago,
and those needs. Yeah,
like any major city that you can just rattle off the top of your head, a top 20, top 50, top 100 city in the United States is having some version of this problem to a variety of extremes based on the state and the compensation, all this kind of stuff. So I understand those are all those variables, but my broad concern here is that if teachers can't buy houses for this specific industry and this specific job, then the school districts, they can't hire teachers. But we need those teachers in these communities.
Yes.
So teachers and educators are really important. But how are we going to pay them? And this is kind of like trying to bridge that gap. But you also have to have willing participants. And so I think this is a very interesting, like, social study, if you will.
Yes.
Where, I'm willing to teach because I love teaching. I'm willing to take the salary they offer me, and I'm also willing to make this housing concession, if you will, in order to make that happen.
One thing that came to mind, and I'm sure a lot of people would have this question, so how does it work? If I'm making $63K a year, is that $63K minus the rent that I'm going to be obviously paying right back to the people that are employing me?
Well, it doesn't go like that hard in this article. The point is, to your question, are you making $63,000 and still paying rent? I don't think that's this scenario. I think the scenario is you're being paid $63,000 and you're being compensated by you have a place to live. So if you have a place to live,
you don't have to worry about housing?
Right, that's what I'm saying. There's multiple ways that this is working because it's not the only school district that's doing this.
That makes sense. I follow you now.
And so, if they've spent in this example, it said they spent $40.8 million over the last 2 years to acquire 52 units and renovate several of the 50 existing units. So if there's no payment, then that person's actually, let's say, taking home $63,000 pre-tax, but they have no housing payment. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is if you have to pay them more, but then they're just offsetting that by paying it back to the school. It's one and the same to a certain degree, and I'm not going to get into the taxation conversation.
Exactly. I didn't want to get into that. I guess my biggest point was that I feel for some people it will make sense. And in some places, they would like to live, without a payment. But I think that there should be, like a, how do I say, like a strategic way of going about this. Like if you're going to live in here without having to pay for housing, then at least be able to use some of that money to save up, to not always stay there, to be able to save up comfortably, to then be able to make that jump into your own place that you can buy it yourself.
Well, and here's the thing. This is actually not unlike other corporate housing situations.
Right.
So this is, I mean, it may be, I don't know how many people in our audience know about corporate housing, but in the corporate housing example, let's say you're an executive and you're a mid-level manager or whatever, or higher, and you have a $100,000, $200,000 compensation package that includes housing. Well, if I have to fly Andy from San Diego and you have to take me across the country and I have to go to, let's just say, Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
A company hires me to go to Nashville, Tennessee. It includes my salary plus a compensation package for housing. And they'll pay for the housing.
Okay.
So if the corporation owns a house, I may have free housing and I still make all my income that my contract is going to fulfill.
Got it.
So this is not that dissimilar. The difference is it's school districts, not corporations. And school districts are using tax money, bond money, and that kind of thing to meet people and close that gap from the housing opportunities they have as a private citizen with their income.
That makes sense.
To actually helping them. Because again, this goes to this other part. We have this other play in the room, which is you need to be able to attract teachers. You have to get the teachers to your school district, and they have to be able to afford to live somewhere.
No, I did not know that corporate, packages go like that, and that sometimes that the corporation owns the property, so therefore they don't have to pay. I think that's very helpful in the sense that, depending on your job and wherever you're at, that's very helpful because it allows the person to actually do their job to the fullest capacity without worrying about, hey, am I going to have a roof over my head? Now, switching it over to schools and teachers, that I think it really just depends, because then a lot of people will start getting into that subject of, well, who's paying for this at the end of the day? We know who's paying for it, but, that's not the point. I think the point is, making it affordable for people to have a base to then be able to jump into home ownership on their own. And even if like the people that live in the corporate housing, I mean, I think that goes with their style of life. If they're going to be moving around place to place, then it really doesn't benefit for them to be able to buy a house.
Yeah, and also the other thing,
at least not at that moment.
And there's also, I think, it's not a commuting thing. It's like being part of a fixture of a community.
Yeah.
Like I know for when I was, I'm much older than you, but when I was a kid, a lot of the teachers that worked at the schools I went to, they also lived in the local community within maybe 5 or 10 miles. They weren't commuting 60 miles a day to come and teach 4th grade. They lived down the street, or they lived a couple miles away. And also, to go back, I want to make sure I touch back on this before we continue, but so there's that kind of part of it where you're like involved in the community and all that. But another way this is being offered as a solution is they use this Austin example, where in Austin they're using proceeds from a bond to purchase properties and construct affordable housing for teachers and staff. So they're actually using excess from a bond measure and putting it back to you. So and maybe there was a stipulation that they couldn't use $43.9 million to go towards salary or compensation, but they could use it for XYZ, something else.
That makes sense.
And this was a decision to do that. So that is an interesting solution as well, because that money has to be applied and used somewhere. And this leads to kind of the general idea of this conversation topic for me with you is the Labor Market Institute identifies 473 job classifications as, quote, critical occupations, totaling more than 100 million workers, or roughly 70% of U.S. workers. So that's out of a labor force of roughly 50,000 plus or minus a little bit. So that's a lot of people that are in this classification, and critical sounds maybe more critical, maybe dramatic than it is. I don't know what the definition is exactly, but the fact that there's 473 classifications is what caught my eye.
I mean, those people aren't going away. I mean, not anytime soon.
Well, the problem's not going away either.
So it's like, yeah, exactly. I think that's still the underlying problem in a lot of things. It goes back to affordability. Like, you can shift it around however you want, but until we actually tackle the root of the problem of how we can make things more affordable, we can put in temporary solutions, temporary Band-Aids, but until we have an actual solution, I feel that we're still going to be, trying different things like this until we have something that's sustainable. Because overall, I mean, affordability, rates come down, but then, prices stay the same, and it's like a wheel that you're just kind of turning on, that if okay, one thing happens, but then you go back to the other thing, but then that stops, and then it's like, double-edged sword. You never get the end of it.
Well, and you remember there's a lot of people that are new to our show. We've had like tremendous growth through the holidays. Thank you everybody for watching and subscribing. That's been like tremendous. And also the comments too. Like people getting smart up in the comments, and I love it. And I love engaging with people and seeing the responses and seeing our corporate responses to that and our personal responses. But here's my point. If you missed some of the early shows in 2023, Brian, myself, and William sat around. We talked about the housing market and agencies coming up with creative solutions for problems in the market. And that's shown up in a variety of ways. You know, in one conversation, we're talking about the 2-1 buy down, the 3-1 buy down, the 1-1 buy down. Another conversation, we're talking about California releasing funds to provide grants for you to get some money to do permitting and other soft costs for your ADU.
Yep.
And then now we're talking about this, where school districts are getting involved and in being landlords or basically homeowners, if you will, to house their employees. So is this just going to be a continuation of this? I mean, this one is new to me. I had not heard about this, but the way it's referenced in this article is that it has been going on. It's not entirely a novel thing. It's new to me.
It's not very new to me. I've heard
it's not entirely novel
lives,
to these areas, but they're citing two areas that we all know, Austin and Aspen. And, you know, those are cities that are definitely more expensive. Yep. But even if you take some, let's say, lower tier cities, they're going to have the same problem. We're still talking about roughly 100 million people who are in this classification. You take out Austin, Aspen, San Francisco, New York, LA.
Metropolises that are freaking filled with these problems.
Fine, okay. Maybe it's not 100 million. Maybe it's still 60 million.
And these are some of the less critical ones. You know, like we're not talking about a big city like Los Angeles. We're not talking about a big city like New York. Like, what are those numbers looking like?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know what I mean?
So it got me thinking.
If this is just based off of, you know, Aspen and Austin, like I really want to see the actual big producing markets that we see, you know, where they are with this, because it starts with like, okay, if in those big cities they can't control those problems, then what's going to happen? People are going to start spreading out to other cities. And if, you know, eventually you leave, like it's just like I said, moving it around to somewhere else until that place gets too expensive.
Yeah, but I mean, look, I mean, if you want to get like super nuanced about it, I mean, from my perspective, it's a math problem. It's a math problem because it's an affordability issue that's being caused by pricing, math, affordability, all that kind of stuff, right? I said affordability like 3 times right there. But you know, this is saying that half of those essential workers make less than the average Aspen teacher salary that was used in this study. They were using a $63,000 salary for this study. And so they're saying half of these essential workers, these 100 million,
make
so let's
less
say
than
50 million, make less than that. So I'm talking about this being a much bigger problem than just this little thing. Like I read this article talking about this one little city, this one little school district, this other area in Austin, this excess bond. But when you take the 30,000-foot view of this is a much, much bigger problem.
So what happens when you can't pay for anything anymore and they can't afford
you're destined to just be perpetual renters, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, I think the other unfortunate moving variable here is just cost of living. You have general cost of living that is outside the school district's control too. You know, school districts don't control the price of eggs or the price of fuel or the price of milk and whatever you're spending money on. They don't control
everything you got to pay a month.
Utility costs, your cell phone bill, all that stuff. So there's always going to be a level of like personal agency that you're responsible for running a good personal budget. But at the same time, you can run a solid budget, bulletproof, and prices still go up on you.
So it's exactly what we talked about in past shows, where the salary stays fixed, but the costs don't stay fixed. And when the costs go up and you're at a fixed salary, I mean, what do? You have to incur more debt, figure something out, or somehow just get through it.
Yeah, and you know, interestingly enough, that we're having this conversation, you know. Later on this week, we have a show coming out with our friend Carlo Diaz.
Yeah.
And Carlo Diaz, we had this conversation.
He used a $15 California burrito, and that in itself said a lot.
Right. So Carlo Diaz is our friend with Old Harbor Insurance, and he's on our show coming up on Friday. That is the Friends of Mortgage Heroes. And we talked about this, where even from an insurance perspective, the cost to replace and all the variety of reasons why inflation is so high on the insurance side, they're not able to even catch up with that.
It just doesn't make sense for them.
They're chasing it all the time. And as consumers in this kind of situation where we're looking at these types of volumes of people, they're clearly chasing everything all the time.
Yeah.
So, you know, as far as solutions are concerned, this one seems like it's a palatable one. I can totally digest the concept.
Yeah.
I don't know what it looks like. I'm talking to you guys about a piece of paper and an article I found on the internet that we could talk about that seems interesting and might have a solution embedded in it that can spread. That's why I chose this one, is I think this could actually be used in other areas that would actually alleviate some of the problem people are having on their own.
So I brought it up an example from here, which one of my buddies actually works for Facebook, and he's up in LA. Facebook, well, he told me that just in the area that he lives, it was Facebook, I believe, Google, and Apple. Big tech companies came down here in LA area, and I want to say the Irvine area, and they bought a little area of communities, right? And in those apartment complexes or communities, it's owned by only Google, Facebook, or big tech companies. Same thing. They pay for their salary. They basically work out of there, and all their work stuff is inside their house because they're not working remote. So I didn't know that that's how it extended to other companies as well. I mean, those big tech companies had I remember that he was living in San Francisco. Same thing, was getting paid by a tech company. And like now when they moved down to to Los Angeles, he brought that up. And I saw it in an article where it says that they already are doing it. And it brought to me that the Tesla, they build that little like community out in Texas, and all their workers work there because why? Because the factory's there. It's easy for them to stay there. They don't have to commute far, and it's easier, I bet, for Elon or Tesla to be able to, hey, I'd rather have you guys all working here, know that you guys are going to show up, be reliable.
Cool. Well, I mean, and in the end, like, so as a private company, it becomes an asset. But I think as a school district, it's a publicly held asset, because if it's bond measure money and it's tax money that's actually buying these, it's going to be the school district or the city. Let's say the city of Chula Vista bought a bunch of houses. It'd be Chula Vista owning the houses still.
Right. What I would like to see that it'd be, and I don't know how this would actually pan out, but it'd be very beneficial. And I'd like to see something like, hey, if we are going to take on this, these assets and it's publicly owned, how can we make this work for the community around? So it's like, how can we utilize this tool and asset to be able to flourish and grow our community as a whole? Like if they are going to start taking down properties, maybe some of those properties can be affordable housing for certain people inside the community. So things like that I would like to see. And if they are going to be doing it for profit, put that, profit back into,
but it's got to at least cover. It can't be a sinkhole.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Like if it's not getting paid, how is it going to get paid one way or another? So there has to be some sort of like, hey, for sure it's going to get paid, because what if we go into, let's say, some sort of financial crisis that's huge on all sorts? What if now the own government or who owns the properties can't pay anymore?
Well, again, I think this is very nuanced. It depends on whether the city owns it or the school district somehow is holding it, or even how much it's financed. It may not be financed at all. If you're using bond measure money, that's already money in the kitty, and you're just spending, just think of it like cash. If you're just spending it like cash, you're spending it like cash. But also, there's other people's money. So if I have a bond measure that's got all this cash and I can leverage against it to borrow the money, then maybe you're in a borrowing situation and you're holding on to a lot of cash, and you can use that for your maintenance and your overhead and your recurring costs, that kind of thing. So I don't know how they're playing it on the financial side.
And I'm just kind of spitballing here from all different angles.
I know, but I think that the point in discussing this is important, because I know on the horizon for us, even ending 2023, we're looking at like, hey, look, this is not going to change. Housing is going to remain unaffordable for a lot of people, because even though mortgage rates have come down, demand came back, some sellers came off of the fence, and you're going to see prices remain the same in most places. There is not a free fall of home prices. There was a lull of sellers putting homes on the market. We saw less units for sale, but we did not see dramatic price drops in the major metropolitan cities of the United States.
And I think, there's an article that we're going to go over that we had a 3% growth year over year for home prices.
On the West Coast it was like 4.2% in the final quarter of the year.
And home prices still haven't dropped. So what that means is that even after we had high interest rates all last year, less buyers, less competition, less movement in the market, homes still went up. And I don't care if it's, 0.5%, it still went up. So regardless, 3%, you gain an equity overall on average. So it's like, regardless of, what the market was, real estate still showed positive gains.
Yeah. And you're going to see more people come off the fence. And I think that, kind of, I know we're leading into that conversation a little bit, but, prices are going to remain the same. You see mortgage rates holding. We're in an election cycle year. No one wants to rock the boat for the negative. So if there's any direction in rates, it's going to get better. But again, that then comes with prices going back up and more demand coming back. There's a supply of homes.
It goes back to the hamster wheel.
Yeah. Houses take time to build. You can't just order one on Amazon. It shows up tomorrow on Prime on a truck.
You can't?
Well, wait, no. You could tiny home, man, maybe. Not hey, go to Home Depot. They sell homes now, too.
Hey, they're going to start listing those very soon.
Yeah, Home Depot. I'm just gonna go to the Home Depot parking lot and put a welcome
open
home
house. Open house.
I'm just gonna live in that thing. Hey, there's I got a whole parking lot in my front yard.
Hey, what do you guys need, huh?
All right,
I got houses.